Under Savannah's humid dusk, 30-to-year-old Jamal Carter wipes down tables at the riverfront grill when three drunk tourists stagger out, snickering after stiffing him and slinging slurs. Their laughter dies as a gleaming black Rolls-Royce purrs up, the driver leaping out to call Jamal boss. The trio's smug faces twist into shock, clueless that the spark ignites a brutal revenge saga that'll torch their privileged lives. What war have they just unleashed? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic showdowns. Jamal Carter moved through the bustling riverfront grill with the kind of quiet precision that came from years of navigating chaos without breaking a sweat. At 32, he had this gig down to an art, his lean frame weaving between tables. Along Savannah, Georgia's cobblestone docks, the humid air thick with the scent of fried shrimp and the faint tang of river water. The place was upscale, all polished oak and brass rails, the kind of spot where old money sipped martinis and new money flaunted watches they couldn't pronounce. Jamal's crisp white shirt hugged his shoulders, his apron tied tight, every crease smoothed out like armor against the night's inevitable mess. He could read a room faster than most folks could blink, spotting trouble before it even walked through the door. Tonight, trouble didn't just walk in, it swaggered. Three tourists pushed through the heavy glass doors, their voices slicing through the hum of clinking glasses and soft jizz like a chainsaw through silk. Greg, the ringleader, led the pack, a 6'2" ex-frat bro with a sunburned neck and a polo shirt stretched tight over a gym rat chest. His sandy hair was slicked back with enough gel to reflect the chandelier light, and his laugh boomed, too loud, too forced. Tanya trailed him, her sharp green eyes scanning the room like she was pricing it for a garage sale. Her platinum blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail that swished with every step. She wore a designer sundress, probably costing more than Jamal's rent, and her smirk said she knew it. Carter brought up the rear, quieter, his weary frame draped in a linen shirt, dark eyes flicking over everything, calculating, like he was filing it all away for later. They smelled of privilege, the kind that didn't ask permission, and as they brushed past a couple waiting for a table without so much as a nod, Jamal clocked them instantly. He'd dealt with their type before, the ones who saw him as a prop, not a person, until they needed a refill or a scapegoat. The hostess, a nervous 20-something named Claire, scurried over with menus, her smile tight as she led them to a prime table. By the wide windows overlooking the docks, boats bobbing under the orange glow of dusk. It was the kind of spot folks booked a month out. But Greg slipped Claire a crisp $100 bill with a wink, and suddenly the rules bent like cheap wire. Jamal adjusted his grip on his notepad, his jaw tight, but his face a mask of calm, and approached, steps steady on the hardwood floor. The trio sprawled across their chairs like they owned the joint, Greg kicking his feet up on an empty seat, Tanya tossing her purse onto the table with a clatter, Carter leaning back with his arms crossed, watching. Jamal stopped a foot from the table, pen poised, and cleared his throat just enough to cut through their chatter. "Evening, folks. What can I get started for you?" His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of tone that disarmed most people. Not these three. Greg tilted his head back, eyeing Jamal up and down like he was sizing up a used car, then let out a snort. "Well, damn. Look at this guy, all fancy with his little apron. You starched that yourself, buddy." His grin was wide, teeth gleaming, and he nudged Tanya, who snickered, her nails tapping the menu. Jamal didn't blink, just kept his gaze steady, letting the jab roll off him like water on glass. He'd heard worse, and he'd learned long ago that reacting was what they wanted. "We've got a solid bourbon selection if you're interested," he said, nodding toward the menu Greg hadn't bothered to open. "Top shelf's got a 20-year Pappy Van Winkle, smooth as it gets." Greg's eyebrows shot up, but not in admiration. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gold Rolex catching the light. "Pappy, huh? But you can't even spell bourbon, my man. You pouring that for us or just dreaming about it?" Tanya laughed, a high, cutting sound, and flicked her ponytail over her shoulder. "Oh my God, Greg, stop. He's trying so hard." Carter stayed silent, but his lips twitched, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Jamal's grip tightened on his pen, the plastic creaking faintly, but his face stayed neutral, a fortress they couldn't breach. "It's popular with folks who know their stuff," he said evenly, sidestepping the bait. "Anything else catch your eye?" Tanya snatched the menu from Greg's hands, skimming it with a wrinkled nose. "Ugh, all this seafood nonsense. What's with the prices? You eat this junk, or is it just for the rich white folks?" Her tone dripped with mockery, her eyes daring him to flinch. Jamal met her stare, unflinching. "The crab cakes are a hit, fresh off the boat this morning. Pair it with the bourbon, you've got a solid night." Greg clapped his hands once, loud enough to turn heads at the next table. "Listen to this guy, acting like he's some damn food critic. What's good here, huh? Sell me something, waiter boy." The boy landed like a slap, deliberate, heavy, and Jamal's pulse kicked up, heat creeping up his neck. He swallowed it down, kept his voice level. "The ribeyes aged 28 days, seared just right. Comes with a bourbon glaze if you're feeling it." Carter finally spoke, his voice low, almost lazy. "You eat that kind of stuff, or you just here to carry it?" His dark eyes locked on Jamal's, testing, probing. Jamal didn't miss a beat. "I've had it, it's solid." A lie. Technically, he couldn't afford half the menu on his paycheck, but he'd be damned if he let them know that. Greg barked a laugh, leaning back so hard his chair creaked. "Sure you have, champ. All right, bring us the bourbon, the pricey one, and those crab cakes. Let's see if you can handle that without screwing it up." Tanya waved a hand like she was dismissing a servant. "And make it quick. We're not here to wait on you." Jamal nodded once, sharp and curt, and turned on his heel, their snickers trailing him like exhaust fumes. He wove back through the dining room, the chatter of other guests fading into a dull roar in his ears, their words looping in his head. "Learn your place, waiter boy. Bet you can't spell it." At the bar, he punched in the order, his fingers steady, but his mind racing. He'd dealt with rude before, hell, he'd dealt with racist before, but this crew was something else. A pack of wolves in designer threads, hunting for sport. The bartender, a grizzled guy named Reggie with a salt and pepper beard, slid the bourbon bottle over with a raised eyebrow. "Rough table." Jamal grunted, pouring the amber liquid into 3 glasses with a precision that belied the storm brewing inside him. "Just some clowns who think money buys manners." Reggie chuckled, low and dry. "They always do, till it don't." Jamal loaded the tray, the glasses glinting under the bar lights, and carried it back, his steps measured, his face a blank slate. He set the drinks down one by one, the clink of glass on wood punctuating the air, then slid the steaming crab cakes into the center, golden brown and fragrant. "Here you go," he said, stepping back, waiting. Greg took a swig of the bourbon, swishing it like he'd seen in a movie, then grimaced theatrically. "Not bad, I guess. You picked this out special for us." Tanya sipped hers and coughed, loud and fake, clutching her chest. "Oh Lord, it's strong. You trying to knock us out or what?" Carter just swirled his glass, staring at Jamal over the rim, saying nothing but watching everything. Jamal nodded, tight-lipped. "Anything else?" Greg waved him off, already turning back to Tanya. "Nah, you're good. For now." Jamal retreated, their laughter spiking behind him, sharp and jagged. He busied himself with another table, refilling water glasses, but his ears stayed tuned to their corner. "Dude's got no spine," Greg muttered, loud enough to carry. "Probably used to taking orders his whole life." Tanya giggled. "Yeah, he's got that vibe. Like he's just happy to be here." Carter's voice cut in, soft but cold. "Wonder how long he's been stuck doing this." Jamal's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around a pitcher, but he kept moving, kept working. Hours ticked by, the grill emptying out, the trio lingering like a bad smell. When they finally stood, Greg tossed the receipt onto the table, a crumpled mess, and sauntered out with Tanya and Carter in tow, their laughter echoing off the walls. Jamal approached, dread pooling in his gut, and flattened the paper. No tip, just 5 scrawled words in Greg's sloppy handwriting. "Learn your place." His breath hitched, the room tilting for a split second, then steadied. He folded the receipt, slipped it into his pocket, and stared out the window at their retreating backs, the docks swallowing them into the night. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jamal Carter stood behind the bar at the Riverfront Grill, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days, the crumpled receipt still burning a hole in his pocket. The words "learn your place" looped in his head like a bad song, each syllable stoking the ember of anger he'd banked down all night. Outside, the Savannah night buzzed with cicadas, the docks glowing under sodium lights, boats rocking gently against their moorings. Greg, Tanya, and Carter were gone, their laughter long faded, but Jamal wasn't done with them. Not even close. He clocked out at 11. The grill's dining room a ghost town save for Reggie sweeping up crumbs by the hostess stand. "You good, man?" Reggie asked, his voice gravelly, his broom pausing mid-stroke. Jamal nodded, tight and quick, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "Yeah, just need some air." He stepped into the sticky heat, the river's briny scent hitting him as he scanned the waterfront. Their type didn't vanish, they strutted, and he had a hunch where they'd gone. He cut through an alley, cobblestones slick under his sneakers, and headed toward the marina a half-mile down where yachts bobbed like fat, gleaming prizes. Sure enough, there they were, sprawled on a rented 30-footer tied up at the far end, its deck lit with string lights that cast jagged shadows on the water. Greg's voice carried over the lapping waves, loud and sloppy with bourbon. "Told that waiter who's boss, didn't I? Stiffed him good, wrote him a little love note, too." Tanya's giggle sliced through the air, piercing and smug. "Oh my God," his face when he saw it. "I bet he's still crying in the back." Carter's low chuckle followed, colder, sharper. "Guy's probably used to it. Should have seen it coming." Jamal crouched behind a stack of crab traps, his pulse hammering in his ears, his fingers curling into fists. They thought they'd put him in some imaginary box and walked away clean. Not tonight. He watched them stumble around the deck, Greg sloshing a fresh drink over the railing, Tanya snapping selfies with her tongue out, Carter leaning against the helm like he was plotting something. The yacht's name, Tide Chaser, gleamed in gold letters on the stern, and Jamal filed it away. He needed a play, something smart, something they wouldn't see coming. He slipped back into the shadows, jogging to blocks to a dive bar called Rusty's, a hole in the wall where dock workers and off-duty cops swapped stories over cheap beer. The neon sign flickered as he pushed through the door, the air inside thick with cigarette smoke and the tang of spilled whiskey. At the end of the bar sat Officer Darnell Hayes, a broad-shouldered guy in his 40s, nursing a Bud Light, his badge tucked into a pocket like an afterthought. Jamal knew him from a few late-night chats at the grill, enough to call him a friendly face. He slid onto the stool next to him, keeping his voice low. "Hey, Darnell, you working the docks tonight?" Darnell glanced over, his mustache twitching. As he took a sip, "Off the clock, man." "Why, what's up?" Jamal leaned in, casual but deliberate, his eyes steady. "Just saw some clowns on a yacht down at the marina, Tide Chaser. Looked wasted, weaving all over the deck. Bet they're dumb enough to take it out like that." Darnell raised an eyebrow, setting his bottle down with a soft clink. So reckless boating's a quick way to lose a rental. Who's this crew?" Jamal shrugged, playing it cool. "Tourists, loudmouths. Figured you'd know the type." Darnell grunted, a half smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I do. I'll pass it along." Jamal nodded, slid a 5 across the bar for Darnell's next round, and slipped out before the conversation went deeper. He looped back to the marina, sticking to the shadows, his breath shallow as he watched the Tide Chaser. 20 minutes later, a patrol boat's spotlight cut through the dark, pinning the yacht in a harsh white glare. 2 uniformed cops climbed aboard, their voices sharp as they barked orders. Greg staggered to the railing, his sunburned face twisting in confusion, then fury. "What the hell's this about?" he yelled, slurring hard. Tanya clutched her phone, filming the whole thing like it was a reality show, while Carter hung back, his jaw tight. The lead cop, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, pointed at the deck. "Gotta tip you're impaired, sir. Step off the vessel now," Greg sputtered, waving his arms. "This is bullshit, we're fine." But the cop wasn't having it, and within minutes, A tow line was hooked up, the yacht groaning as it was. Dragged toward impound, Jamal stayed low, his vantage point behind a rusted piling giving him a front row seat. The trio piled onto the dock, Greg kicking at a piling and swearing loud enough to wake half of Savannah. Tanya whining about her ruined night. Carter pacing with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Bad luck, Hug Greg snarled, spitting. Into the water. Someone's gotta pay for this. Jamal's lips curled into a smirk, small but sharp. The first real win of the night settling into his bones. He'd hit them where it hurt, their precious toy yanked out from under them, their egos bruised in front of the whole marina. He turned to slip away, the adrenaline buzzing through him like a live wire, ready to call it a night and let them stew. He made it 10 steps before Greg's voice cut through the air again. Quieter now, dangerous. Wait a damn minute. Jamal froze, glancing back over his shoulder. Greg was squinting into the shadows, his head cocked, eyes narrowing as they locked onto Jamal's silhouette. That's him. That's the damn waiter. Tanya spun around, her ponytail whipping. What? Where? Carter stepped forward, his gaze cold and piercing, cutting through the dark like a knife. Right there, he said, pointing straight at Jamal. Greg's face split into a grin. But it wasn't friendly, it was feral. Oh, you're dead, man. I'm gonna find you, you hear me? You're done. Jamal's smirk vanished, his gut twisting as he backed into the alley, his sneakers silent on the damp stone. He broke into a jog, heart pounding, the thrill of victory souring fast. They'd seen him. They knew. He'd poked the bear, and now it was awake, claws out, promising. Blood. He ducked behind a dumpster, catching his breath, the marina's lights fading as he mapped his next move. The yacht was gone, yeah, but Greg's threat hung heavy, a storm cloud rolling in fast. Jamal had won this round, sure, but it wasn't clean, wasn't final. He'd humiliated them, cost them their night, maybe a chunk of their deposit, and they weren't the type to shrug it off. He thought of the grill, his quiet life, the way he'd kept his head down for years, and now this one spark that could burn it all down. He straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow, and started the long walk home, the river's murmur fading behind him. He'd hit them good, made them feel small for once, and damn if it didn't feel right. But Greg's words echoed, a jagged edge in the silence. I'm gonna find you. Jamal's jaw tightened, his mind racing. He'd taken the first swing, landed it square, but they weren't done swinging back. Not by a long shot. He glanced over his shoulder one last time, the marina a speck in the distance, and picked up his pace, the night stretching out ahead, thick with the promise of something darker. They'd underestimated him once, laughed in his face, left that receipt like a slap. Now they knew he could bite back. But what they didn't know, what Jamal himself was only starting to feel, was how far this could go, how deep this cut could bleed. He'd won tonight, yeah, but it was just the opening bell, and the real fight was coming, fast and ugly. Jamal Carter trudged home through Savannah's quiet streets, the adrenaline from his dockside win fading into a dull ache behind his eyes. The night was sticky, the air heavy with jasmine and the faint hum of crickets, but Greg's voice still rattled in his skull. I'm gonna find you. He shook it off, turning onto his block, a row of shotgun houses with peeling paint and sagging porches, his own a faded blue number at the end. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom rental with a leaky faucet and a couch older than he was, but it was his, a hard-won slice of peace in a world that didn't hand out breaks. He unlocked the door, the bolt sticking like always, and stepped inside, kicking off his sneakers. The living room smelled of lemon cleaner and last night's takeout, the TV flickering silently on a news loop about some city council vote. He dropped his backpack, the receipt from Greg slipping out onto the floor. Those 5 words glaring up at him, learn your place. He snatched it up, crumpling it tighter, and tossed it into the trash, his chest tight. He'd hit them where it hurt, got their yacht towed, watched them squirm. But that look in Greg's eyes, that feral grin, gnawed at him. He sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples, trying to convince himself it was over, that they'd lick their wounds and move on. Fat chance. Across town, Greg wasn't sleeping either. He paced the plush suite of their boutique hotel, The Tide Chaser impound papers crumpled in his fist, his sunburned face flushed with bourbon and rage. Tanya sprawled on the king-sized bed, scrolling her phone, her ponytail fanned out on the pillow. "Can you chill, babe? It's just a boat," she muttered, not looking up. Carter sat by the window, his weary frame still, his dark eyes tracking Greg like a hawk. "She's right," he said, voice low. "We'll get it back tomorrow." Greg spun on him, teeth bared. "Screw tomorrow. That waiter set us up. You saw him. Lurking like some damn rat. He thinks he's slick. Huh. I'm not letting that slide." Tanya sighed, loud and dramatic, but Greg ignored her, slamming the papers onto the dresser. "Tanya, you still got that real estate hookup from your dad's firm?" She glanced up, frowning. "Yeah, why?" Greg's grin twisted, ugly and sharp. "Find me his address. I want to pay our boy a visit." Carter's smirk flickered, a spark of approval, and Tanya rolled her eyes but tapped away at her phone, pulling strings she'd bragged about 100 times. Within an hour, she had it. Jamal's rental ping from some shady tenant database her dad's company kept on speed dial. 1237 Oak Lane, she read, tossing the phone aside. "Happy now?" Greg grabbed his keys, his polo shirt wrinkled from the night's chaos. "Oh, I will be." Jamal was halfway to sleep, the TV's blue glow washing over him when the first bang rattled his front door. He jolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs, the sound sharp and deliberate like a fist on wood. Another bang, louder, then Greg's voice boomed through the night, slurred but vicious. "Hey, waiter boy, get your ass out here." Jamal's stomach dropped, his bare feet hitting the floor as he crept to the window, peeling back the curtain an inch. There they were, all three, Greg pounding the door with a meaty fist, Tanya leaning against the porch rail with a smirk, Carter kicking at the steps like he was testing their strength. "Come on, coward," Greg yelled, his breath fogging in the cool air. "You want to play games? Let's play." Jamal's pulse roared, his hands shaking as he backed away, mind racing. How the hell did they find him? He grabbed his phone, fumbling to dial his sister, Lena, a nurse who lived 10 minutes away and never backed down from a fight. The line rang twice before her sleepy voice picked up. "Jamal? It's late, what's wrong?" He kept his voice low, urgent. "Lena, get over here, now. Some psychos from work found my place. They're banging the door down." She didn't hesitate. "On my way." Outside, Greg's shouts grew nastier, laced with venom. "Thought you could screw us over, huh? Boy, open this damn door or we'll kick it in." Tanya laughed, egging him on. "Yeah, come out. Little man, let's see that big shot attitude now." Carter stayed silent, but his eyes gleamed, scanning the house like a predator circling prey. Jamal grabbed a kitchen chair, jamming it under the doorknob, his breath shallow as the wood groaned under Greg's blows. A rock sailed through the air, shattering his front window with a crash that sent glass skittering across the floor, the humid night spilling inside. He ducked, glass crunching under his socks, and dialed 911, whispering his address to the dispatcher. "Hurry, they're breaking in." The operator's calm voice promised help, but it felt miles away. Greg's fist slammed again, the doorframe splintering, and then another rock flew, this one smashing the porch light, plunging the yard into shadow. Jamal's phone buzzed. Lena texting, 5 minutes out. He crouched behind the couch, sweat beating on his forehead, the trio's voices a vicious chorus. "You're nothing, you hear me?" Greg roared. "Gonna teach you where you belong." Tanya's giggle turned shrill. "Look at him, hiding like a scared kid." Carter finally spoke, his tone ice cold. "He'll come out eventually." Jamal's chest burned, fear and fury twisting together. But he stayed low, waiting, praying Lena beat the cops here. Headlights flashed down the street, tires squealing as Lena's beat-up Honda skidded to a stop. She burst out, all 5'4" of her scrubs wrinkled from a late shift, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get the hell off my brother's porch." Greg spun, laughing. But there was a flicker of uncertainty as she stormed up, fearless. "Oh, look, the family's here," he sneered, stepping toward her. Jamal bolted to the door, yanking the chair free, ready to jump in, when Carter grabbed a rock and hurled it at Lena's car. cracking the windshield with a sickening crunch. She flinched but didn't back down, screaming, "You're done, you. Hear me?" That's when Greg lost it, charging the house again. But the wail of sirens split the night, red and blue lights flooding the street. Two squad cars screeched up, cops spilling out with hands on holsters. "Step back." Now one barked. A burly guy with a flashlight aimed at Greg's face. The trio froze. Greg's fists unclenching slow, Tanya's smirk vanishing, Carter backing off with his hands up. "Just having fun, officer," Greg slurred, but the cop wasn't buying it. Eyeing the broken window and splintered door. "Fun's over. Get out of here before I haul you in." They hesitated, Greg muttering curses, then piled into their rented SUV, peeling out with a screech that echoed down the block. Jamal stepped onto the porch, glass crunching underfoot, his breath ragged as Lena grabbed his arm. "You okay?" she asked, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was crashing. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the taillights disappearing around the corner. The cops took a statement, jotted down the damage, promised to patrol the area, but Jamal knew better than to trust that. As they drove off, Lena helped him sweep up the glass, the silence between them heavy. Morning broke harsh and gray, the sun barely cutting through the clouds as Jamal stood on his porch, staring at the wreckage. The broken window gaped like a wound, the doorframe sagged, and across the front wall, in dripping red spray paint, 2 words screamed, "Go back." His stomach churned, the victory from the yacht sinking into a swamp of dread. They'd found him, trashed his home, threatened his sister, all because he'd dared to push back. He'd thought he'd won, thought he'd taught them a lesson they'd swallow and move on from. But this was war, raw and ugly, and it was crashing right through his front door. Lena came up behind him, her face hard. "They're not stopping, are they?" Jamal shook his head, his voice a low growl. "No, but neither am I." He'd hit them once, made them bleed pride, but they'd come back swinging harder, turning his safe corner of the world into a battlefield. The receipt, the yacht, it all felt small now, a spark that had ignited something he couldn't outrun. They wanted him broken, scared, gone. He clenched his fists, the pain's acrid stench stinging his nose, and knew one thing for damn sure: they'd underestimated him again, and that was their mistake. Jamal Carter stood on his wrecked porch, the morning sun barely warming the chill in his bones, the red spray paint screaming "Go back" like a slap across his face. Glass crunched under his sneakers, the broken window gaping, his front door sagging on its hinges. Lena hovered nearby, her nurse's scrubs rumpled from the sleepless night, her arms crossed tight. "This is insane, Jamal," she said, her voice sharp with worry. "They're animals." He nodded, slow and heavy, his eyes tracing the jagged letters. Animals didn't plan like this though. Didn't hunt down addresses and smash lives over a stiff tip and a towed boat. This was personal, calculated, and dripping with hate. He'd hit them hard last night, watched their yacht get dragged off, felt that flicker of triumph. But now his home was a war zone, and that flicker was drowning in dread. He turned to Lena, his jaw tight. "I'm not running." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, but what's the play here? Cops won't do much." "You saw them." She was right. The patrol had rolled off with promises that felt flimsy as wet paper. Jamal's mind raced, replaying Greg's feral grin, Tanya's taunts, Carter's cold stare. They thought they'd broken him, thought he'd curl up and take it. Big mistake. He pulled out his phone, dialing Marcus, his best friend since high school, a lanky tech whiz who could crack anything with a keyboard. Marcus picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Yo, Jamal, it's barely 7, what's up?" Jamal didn't waste time. "My place got trashed last night, some racist clowns from work. I need you." "Man," Marcus was awake now, the sleep gone from his tone. "Trashed? You serious?" "I'm there in 20. True to his word, Marcus rolled up in his rattling old pickup, his weary frame hopping out with a laptop bag slung over one shoulder, his dreads tied back messy. He froze when he saw the paint, the glass, the splintered door. "Holy hell, bro. This is next level." "Who did this?" Jamal filled him in, voice low and steady, recounting the grill, the receipt, the yacht, the midnight attack. Lena chimed in, her anger flaring as she described the rocks, the slurs, her cracked windshield. Marcus whistled low, shaking his head. These punks got money and no sense. We hitting back? Jamal's eyes glinted, hard and sure. Oh, we're hitting back. They set up in the living room. Marcus's laptop glowing on the coffee table. Lena brewing coffee that filled the air with a bitter edge. Jamal paced, his socks picking up stray glass while Marcus dug into Greg online, his fingers flying over the keys. All right, give me something to start with, Marcus said. Cracking his knuckles, Jamal thought fast. Greg, mid-20s, loud as hell, gold Rolex, tourist vibe. Tanya's got real estate ties. Carter's quiet but shady. Marcus nodded, diving into social media, public records, anything he could scrape. It didn't take long. Boom, got him. Gregory Allen Holt, trust fund brat from Charleston. Posts pics of his daddy's beach house like it's his job. Look, at this. He spun the screen, showing Greg flexing on Instagram. Captioned, living that 1% life. Jamal's lip curled. Keep going. Marcus grinned, mischief sparking in his eyes. Oh, I'm in deep now. Check this, his family's got shell companies, offshore accounts, the works. Daddy's dodging taxes like it's a sport. Jamal stopped pacing, leaning over the screen. Can you prove it? Marcus smirked. Give me an hour. While Marcus worked, Lena swept up more glass, her movements sharp with frustration. This guy's a spoiled punk. Jamal. What's he even doing here? Jamal shrugged. Flexing. Probably. Doesn't matter. He picked the wrong fight. Marcus whooped, slamming his laptop shut. Got it, bro. Transaction logs, bank statements. All shady as hell. He's funneling cash through the Caymans, untaxed millions. Jamal's mind clicked. A plan forming. Leak it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sure? This'll blow up. Jamal nodded. Fierce, let it burn. Marcus sent the files to a local blogger, a scrappy guy named Eli who loved a good scandal. With a note, trust fund kid screwing the system. Check this out. By noon, Ellie's post hit. Charleston heir caught in tax evasion scheme. The comments. Exploding with outrage. Jamal watched it spread from his phone, Twitter lighting up. Hashtags trending. Hashtag Greg Holt scam. That night at the grill, he clocked in, apron crisp despite the chaos, serving tables with a quiet smirk as whispers rippled through the dining room. You hear about that Holt kid? One suit muttered over his steak. Whole family's dirty. His date replied, sipping her wine. Greg's name was Mud. His smug face plastered across every screen in Savannah, and Jamal felt the weight lift. Just a little. He'd taken their pride, turned it to ash, and damn if it didn't taste sweet. He was wiping down a table when the door swung open, Tanya storming in, her sundress wrinkled, her ponytail frayed, fury twisting her face. Heads turned, the room hushing as she marched straight for him, heels clicking loud on the hardwood. You, she hissed, jabbing a finger at his chest. You slimy little creep, you did this. Didn't you? Jamal straightened, calm as steel, setting the rag aside. Did what? Her eyes narrowed, venom dripping. Don't play dumb, waiter boy. That blog, the leak, Greg's life is ruined because of you. Jamal tilted his head, voice smooth. Sounds like Greg ruined himself, hiding cash he didn't earn. Tanya's face flushed red, her nails digging into her palms. You think? You're so smart. Huh? You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. You'll pay for this. I swear it. She spun on her heel, storming out, the door slamming behind her, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Jamal exhaled, slow and steady, the diner's eyes boring into him. He grabbed a tray, moving to the next table like nothing happened, but her words clung to him, sharp and cold. He'd won again, hadn't he? Greg's reputation was toast, the whole town buzzing with his shame, and Jamal stood taller for it. But Tanya's threat wasn't empty, it was a promise, and he felt it settle into his gut like lead. Back home, he locked the door tight, Lena crashing on his couch, Marcus still glued to his laptop, tracking the fallout. You're a legend, man, Marcus said, grinning. They're scrambling. Jamal nodded, but his smirk didn't reach his eyes. He'd rallied his crew, struck a blow that echoed. Thought he'd crushed them for good this time. So why did It felt like the ground was shifting under him. Tanya's rage, her connections, her dad's shadow. It all loomed larger now. Had he really won, or just lit a bigger fuse? Hey, drop a comment with number 1 if you think Jamal's got the upper hand here, or number 2 if you're betting on Tanya's comeback. Ever dealt with someone who couldn't take a loss? Hit that like button if you're rooting for justice. And subscribe so you don't miss how this explodes next. What do you think Tanya's cooking up with that "you'll pay" line? Could Jamal's big swing be his last, or is he just getting started? Jamal Carter clocked into the Riverfront Grill the next night, his apron crisp despite the gnawing unease in his gut. Tanya's parting shot, "You'll pay," ringing in his ears like a bell that wouldn't quit. The dining room buzzed with its usual rhythm, clinking glasses and low laughter bouncing off the polished oak walls. The Savannah River glinting through the windows under a bruised purple sky. He'd landed a solid punch with that tax leak. Watched Greg's name turn to dirt across every screen in town. Felt the weight of victory settle in. But Tanya's eyes, wild with fury, promised something uglier, and Jamal knew better than to sleep on a threat like that. He moved through his shift, tray steady, smile tight, serving bourbon and crab cakes to suits who whispered about the Holt scandal, like it was the juiciest gossip since the mayor's affair. Kids finished, one guy chuckled, slicing into his steak. Families scrambling to sell off assets now. Jamal kept his head down, wiping spills, refilling glasses, but his mind churned. He'd rallied Lena and Marcus, turned Greg's privilege into a punchline, thought he'd won this round clean. So why did the air feel thick, like a storm rolling in fast? Halfway through the night, the manager, Mr. Tillman, a weary guy in his 50s with a permanent squint, called him to the back office. Jamal stepped in, the door clicking shut behind him, the hum of the dining room muffled by wood panels and a dusty old desk. Tillman sat there, hunched over a ledger, his bald spot gleaming under the fluorescent light. "Jamal," he started, voice low, "we got a problem." Jamal's stomach tightened, but he kept his face blank. "What's up?" Tillman sighed, rubbing his neck like it hurt. "Inventory's off. $1,000 bottle of Pappy Van Winkle's gone missing from the stockroom. Last seen on your shift yesterday." Jamal blinked, the words hitting like a sucker punch. "Missing? I don't touch the stock, you know that." Tillman held up a hand, weary. I know. But the log says you were the last one in there. Restocking napkins or something. Look, I don't want to believe it." But he trailed off, eyes flicking to the door like he expected someone to bust in. Jamal's pulse kicked up, heat creeping up his neck. "But what, you saying I stole it?" Tillman shifted, uncomfortable. "Not me saying it. Got a call from upstairs, corporate. They're pushing this hard. Said they've got evidence." Jamal's mind raced, connecting dots faster than he could breathe. Tanya, her dad, councilman. Vickers, a big shot with a slick smile and dirtier hands, had pull all over town, including the grill's parent company. This wasn't random. This was a trap, sprung tight around his neck. "What evidence?" he pressed, voice steady despite the storm inside. Tillman pulled out a grainy security photo, timestamp from last night, showing Jamal near the stockroom. Door, head down, apron untied. This, plus a witness saying they saw you slip something under your shirt. Jamal stared at the photo, his own face staring back, twisted into something guilty by angle and shadow. "That's bullshit," he snapped, louder than he meant. "I was grabbing napkins, not booze. Who's this witness?" Tillman wouldn't meet his eyes. "Doesn't matter. They're sure it's you." Jamal's fists clenched, knuckles whitening. "So what now?" Tillman sighed again, heavier. "I gotta let you go, Jamal. Corporate's orders. Cops are on their way to sort it out." Before Jamal could argue, the office door swung open to cops stepping in, their boots heavy on the hardwood. The taller one, a beefy guy with a buzz cut, nodded at Tillman. "This him?" Tillman mumbled a yes, and the cop turned to Jamal, hand on his cuffs. "Jamal Carter, you're under arrest for theft. Hands behind your back." Jamal's breath caught, the room tilting as the cuffs clicked cold around his wrists, the metal biting into his skin. The dining room went dead quiet as they marched him out, every eye in the place locked on him. Forks paused midair. Greg sat at a corner table, nursing a bourbon. His sunburned face split with a smirk that said he'd won this round. Tanya wasn't there, but her fingerprints were all over this. Her dad's shadow stretching long and dark. The shorter cop, a weary guy with a mustache, read him his rights, voice flat, while diners whispered. Phones sneaking pics. Framed him good, someone muttered, low enough the cops didn't catch it. Jamal kept his head high, refusing to give Greg the satisfaction of seeing him crack, but inside, he was reeling. They shoved him into the squad car, the door slamming shut with a clang that echoed in his chest, the grille's lights fading as they pulled away. At the station, they booked him, fingerprints smudging ink onto a card, mugshot flashing bright. In his face, Lena bailed him out 2 hours later, her eyes red from crying, her Honda idling outside as he climbed in, jobless, humiliated, the weight of it crushing him. "They set you up," she said, voice shaking as she gripped the wheel. "That bottle, the photo, it's all fake." Jamal nodded, staring out at the blurry streetlights. "Tanya's dad. He's got the juice to pull this." Lena slammed her hand on the dash. "Then we fight it. You didn't do this." He wanted to believe her, wanted to claw his way back. But the cuffs chill lingered. The dining room's stares burned into him. He'd thought he'd crushed them, thought Greg's scandal was the endgame. But this was systemic. A machine grinding him down because he dared to push back. They got home. The go-back paint still glaring from his porch. And Marcus was waiting, laptop open, his face grim. "Bro, I heard. Cops for real?" Jamal sank onto the couch, the springs creaking under him. "Yeah, framed me for stealing a bottle I wouldn't even drink." Marcus cursed, low and fierce, then started typing. "Gimme a sec, I'll dig into this." Jamal watched him work, the glow of the screen cutting through the dark, his mind, a tangle of rage and despair. He'd hit them with the leak, thought he'd won clean. But Tanya's counterattack was surgical, ruthless, stripping his job, his dignity, painting him as a thief for the whole town to see. Marcus paused, squinting at the screen. "Hold up." Found an email from Vickers to Tillman, encrypted but sloppy. Says, "Handle the waiter, make it stick." He bribed him, man, cash under the table. Jamal's head snapped up, a spark flickering through the haze. "You got proof," Marcus grinned. "Fierce, enough to start. Give me time, I'll crack it wide open." Jamal exhaled, slow and jagged, the spark catching, but it wasn't enough yet. He was out on bail, jobless, the grille's doors shut to him. Greg's smirk seared into his memory. He'd thought he'd won, thought he'd turned the tables, but this trap snapped shut fast, tighter than he'd ever imagined. Vickers had reach, money, power, and Jamal was just a name on a rap sheet now, a black man caught in a system that didn't care about truth. Lena sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "We'll fix this," she said, firm despite the tremor in her voice. Jamal nodded, but his eyes stayed on the broken window, the night pressing in. He'd underestimated them, thought their pride was all they had, but this was bigger, uglier. A beast with teeth. They'd taken his job, his peace, damn near his freedom, all because he dared to fight back. The victory from the leak felt like a lifetime ago, drowned out by cuffs and lies. But Marcus's find, that email, it was a crack in their armor, a lifeline he could grab. He'd thought he was done, thought they'd buried him this time. But that spark wouldn't die. They wanted him broken, gone, silenced. Too bad for them. He wasn't built to stay down. Jamal Carter sat on his battered couch, the living room dim save for the glow of Marcus's laptop, the go-back paint outside still stinking through the broken window. His wrists still ached from the cuffs, the sting of the grille's betrayal, burning deeper than the bruises. Lena paced behind him, her sneakers scuffing the hardwood, her voice tight with fury. "They can't just frame you and walk away, Jamal. We've got that email." Vickers bribed Tillman. "It's proof." Marcus hunched over the screen, his dreads spilling loose, fingers dancing across the keys. "It's a start," he said, voice low and focused, "but it's encrypted tight. Gimme a few hours, I'll blow it wide open." Jamal nodded, slow and heavy, the spark from Marcus's find catching fire in his chest. He'd been down, jobless, humiliated, Greg's smirk haunting him from that corner table. But this This was a lifeline, a chance to flip the script. He stood, shaking off the weight, his jaw set. "Do it. I want Vickers bleeding by morning." Marcus grinned, fierce and quick, diving back into the code, the room humming with purpose. Lena stopped pacing, grabbing a broom to sweep the glass again, her movements sharp. "What's the plan?" "Jamal, you're out on bail, no job. They've got you pinned." He met her eyes, steady despite the storm inside. "We hit them where it hurts most, their name. Vickers thinks he's untouchable. Let's prove he ain't." The night stretched long, coffee mugs piling up, the air thick with tension, and the faint buzz of Marcus's laptop fan. Jamal replayed every jab, every slur, the receipt, the rocks, the cuffs, fueling the rage that kept him sharp. By 3 in the morning, Marcus whooped, slamming his palm on the table. "Got it, bro. Full email chain. Vickers to Tillman, 50 grand wired to shut you down. But check this, he's ranting about keeping Savannah white, calling you a problem that needs fixing." Jamal leaned over, the screen's glow painting his face, the words hitting like a gut punch. "Son of a bitch," he growled, the racism laid bare, raw and ugly. Lena's breath hitched, her broom clattering to the floor. "That's a gold mine. Leak it." Jamal nodded, fierce. "Send it to Eli, same blogger. Tell him to run it loud." Marcus typed fast, the file zipping off with a note. "Councilman Vickers caught red-handed, racist and rotten." By sunrise, Savannah woke to chaos. Ellie's blog screaming Vickers exposed, bribery and bigotry. The email chain plastered for all to see. Twitter erupted, #Vickers must go trending. Protest chants echoing outside City Hall by noon. A crowd of locals waving signs, "No room for hate." Jamal watched it unfold from his phone. The news vans swarming Vickers' office. The councilman's slick face palling on live TV as he dodged mix. "No comment," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, his empire cracking under the spotlight. Jamal's chest swelled, a grim satisfaction settling in. He'd turned their trap into a noose, hung Vickers out to dry, and damn if it didn't. "Feel right." Lena clapped his shoulder, her grin fierce. "You did it, bro. He's toast." Marcus leaned back, arms crossed, smug. "Told you, man, we don't play." Jamal exhaled, slow and jagged, the weight lifting just enough to breathe. He'd lost the grill, sure, but this was bigger, a blow that shook the whole damn system. Word spread fast, and by afternoon, a rival spot, Dockside Bistro, called him up. A gruff voice on the line. "Saw what you did to Vickers. Need a waiter." "Who's got guts, Ewan?" Jamal smirked, glancing at the busted porch. "Yeah, I'm in." He started that night, the bistro a cozy joint with weathered wood tables and a view of the river. The air tangy with salt and fried fish. He tied on a fresh apron, served beers and shrimp platters. The chatter of Vickers' downfall buzzing. Through the crowd, "Councilman's done," a fisherman muttered over his pint. "Good riddance." His buddy agreed, tipping extra like it was a thank you. Jamal moved smooth, tray steady, a quiet pride humming through him. He'd rallied. His crew cracked Vickers wide open, landed on his feet. This was victory, real and raw, the kind they couldn't steal. He was wiping down a table. The night winding down when Marcus texted, "Vickers resigned, press conference in 10. Jamal pulled it up on his phone, the bistro's Wi-Fi spotty but enough. Vickers' voice trembling through the speaker. "Due to recent events, I'm stepping down." Effective immediately, the crowd outside City Hall roared, a mix of cheers and jeers. And Jamal's lips curled, sharp and sure. He'd done this, turned their game against them, watched a kingpin fall. He clocked out at midnight, stepping into the cool air, the river's murmur a steady pulse against the docks. Lena waited in her Honda, engine idling, her grin wide as he slid in. "You're a damn legend," she said, pulling onto the street. He chuckled, low and tired, the fight still simmering in his veins. Just getting started. They rolled past his house, the paint still glaring, but it felt smaller now, less like a wound. He'd thought he'd won with the yacht, thought. The leak sealed it, but Vickers' fall. This was the real hit, a knockout punch that echoed. He leaned back, eyes half closed, ready to crash, when headlights flared behind them, too close. Too fast. Lena frowned, glancing in the rear view. Who's that? Jamal twisted, squinting through the back window, his gut tightening as a black SUV loomed, tailing them tight. The driver's face flashed under a streetlight, Greg's sunburned scowl unmistakable. His eyes locked on Jamal's. Pull over, Jamal said, voice low, but Lena shook her head. Accelerating. No way, he's nuts. The SUV swerved, cutting them off at a stop sign, tires screeching as Greg leapt out, his polo shirt soaked with sweat. His fists clenched. You think you're hot shit, huh? He yelled, voice ragged, unhinged. Ruining my girl's dad. You piece of trash. Jamal stepped out, slow and steady, Lena grabbing his arm. Don't. He's not worth it. But Greg was already charging, his breath reeking of bourbon, his swing wild. Jamal dodged, the fist grazing his shoulder, and shoved Greg back hard. Back off, man, it's over. Greg stumbled, laughing, a crazed edge to it. Over? Oh, it's not over, boy. You're gonna bleed for this. He lunged again, but Lena honked, loud and sharp, startling him mid-step. Headlights flashed down the street, a neighbor's porch light flicking on, and Greg froze, panting, his eyes wild. This ain't done. He spat, backing toward his SUV, pointing at Jamal. You're marked, you hear me? He peeled out, rubber burning on asphalt, the taillights vanishing around a bend. Jamal stood there, chest heaving, Lena tugging him back to the car. He's lost it, she said, voice shaking, completely lost it. Jamal nodded, sliding into the passenger's seat, his pulse hammering. He'd taken Vickers down, landed a new gig, thought he'd buried them for good this time. So why was Greg still clawing back? Crazier than ever. He stared out at the empty street, the night pressing in. Greg's threat sinking deep. You're gonna bleed. He'd won big, turned the tables, watched a giant fall. But this wasn't the end, not even close. Greg wasn't some pawn. He was a loose cannon, and that made him dangerous. Jamal's comeback had shaken the board, sure, but it had also woken a beast, one that wouldn't stop until it bit back. He glanced at Lena, her knuckles white on the wheel, and knew one thing for damn sure. They'd underestimated Greg's rage, and that mistake was stalking him now, headlights in the dark, promising something bloody. Jamal Carter slumped in Lena's Honda, the engines hum a faint comfort against the thudding in his chest. Greg's wild eyes and ragged promise, you're gonna bleed, still clawing at his thoughts. The Savannah night wrapped around them, streetlights casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt, the air thick with the promise of rain. Lena gripped the wheel, her jaw tight, her voice low. He's unhinged, Jamal, full-on psycho mode. Jamal nodded, staring out at the empty road, Greg's SUV long gone, but his threat hanging heavy. A noose tightening slow. Yeah, but he's not smart enough to back it up, he said, trying to convince himself more than her. Lena snorted, sharp and bitter. Smart don't matter when he's mad enough to kill. She wasn't wrong. And that gnawed at him, a splinter under his skin. He'd taken down Vickers, turned their game into a public gut punch. Thought he'd won clean this time. But Greg's rage wasn't playing by rules, it was raw, feral. And coming fast, they pulled up to his house, the go-back paint glaring. Under the porch light, a fresh reminder of the war he'd stumbled into. Crash here, Lena said, killing the engine. I'm not leaving you alone with that nutcase loose. Jamal didn't argue. Too wired to sleep anyway, the night stretching out like a trap waiting to spring. Morning broke gray and damp, the river's mist creeping up the street, and Jamal's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the old warehouse on Bay Street, noon. Let's talk this out. No name, but the tone screamed Greg, dripping with that fake cool he couldn't pull off. Jamal stared at it, his gut twisting. Peace talk from a guy who just tried to run him down. Bullshit. Lena snatched the phone, her eyes narrowing. It's a setup, Jamal, don't go. He shook his head, slow and stubborn. If I don't, he'll keep coming. I'll scope it, stay sharp. She cursed, loud and fierce, but he was already grabbing his jacket, the weight of the fight settling into his bones. He took the bus, the rumble of the engine matching the storm in his head, Bay Street looming closer with every stop. The warehouse sat squat and crumbling at the edge, Of town, a relic from Savannah's shipping days, its brick walls tagged with faded graffiti. Windows boarded up tight. Jamal stepped off, the air heavy with rust and wet earth. His sneakers crunching gravel as he circled the lot. No Greg, no SUV, just silence too thick, too still. He texted Lena, "Here, looks empty. Keep your phone on." She fired back, "Be careful." Damn it. He pocketed it, edging toward the side door, its hinges rusted half off. The wood splintered like it had been kicked in before. He pushed it open, slow and quiet, the creak echoing in the cavernous dark inside. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the boards. The air stale with mildew and something sharper, like sweat. "Greg," he called. Voice steady but loud, bouncing off the concrete. No answer, just his own echo mocking him. Back, then it hit, a shadow lunging from the left, fast and heavy. A fist slamming into his jaw before he could turn. Pain exploded, white-hot, his knees buckling as he staggered back, tasting blood. Greg loomed over him, his sunburned face twisted with hate, his polo shirt ripped at the sleeve. Knuckles red. "Thought you'd play hero, huh?" he snarled, spit flying. "Big mistake, boy." Jamal rolled, dodging a wild kick, scrambling. To his feet as two more figures melted out of the shadows. Hired muscle in dirty tees and steel-toe boots, one cracking his knuckles, the other twirling a length of pipe. 3-on-1, a trap snapped shut, and Jamal's heart slammed against his ribs. "What's this, Greg?" He spat, wiping blood from his lip, circling to keep them in sight. "Too scared to face me solo?" Greg laughed, a jagged, unhinged sound. "Scared? Nah, I just wanna watch you break. You think you're better than us, think you can ruin my life and walk away." He nodded at the thugs, and they closed in, the pipe guy swinging low, aiming for Jamal's knees. He jumped back, the metal grazing his shin, pain flaring sharp. But he stayed up, fists clenched. "You started this," Jamal growled, ducking a punch from the second thug, a beefy guy with a buzz cut. "Receipt rocks my job. You brought this." Greg's eyes gleamed, wild and dark. "And I'm ending it." Beat him down. The pipe swung again, catching Jamal's ribs with a sickening thud, air rushing out of him as he hit the concrete, dust choking his lungs. He rolled, kicking at Buzz Cut's ankle, sending him stumbling. But pipe guy grabbed his collar, hauling him up, slamming him against a rusted beam. Blood trickled down his temple, hot and sticky, the world blurring as Greg stepped closer, spitting slurs like venom. "You're nothing, you hear me? Just trash we should have swept out." Jamal's vision swam, but he swung blind, catching Greg's nose with a wet crunch. Blood spraying as Greg howled, staggering back. "Get him," he screamed, and the thugs piled on. Fists raining down, boots stomping, every hit laced with hate. "Boy," and trash hissed between blows. Jamal curled up, protecting his head, pain searing through him, the warehouse spinning, his breath ragged. He'd walked into this, thought he could talk Greg down, outsmart him, but this was a slaughter, a racist ambush meant to bury him. He clawed at the concrete, nails scraping, when sirens wailed faint in the distance, growing louder, sharper. Headlights flashed through the boards, tires screeching outside, and the thugs froze. Pipe guy cursing low, cops, Lena's voice. Cut through, fierce and desperate. Jamal, she'd tracked his phone, called it in. Her Honda skidding up with two squad cars on its tail. Greg bolted, shoving past the thugs, his bloody nose dripping as he vanished into the back shadows. The muscle scattered, pipe guy dropping his weapon with a clang. Buzz Cut crashing through a side exit, but the cops were faster, boots pounding. In, shouts echoing. Hands up. Now, a flashlight blinded Jamal. His arms trembling as he raised them, blood pooling under him, Lena rushing to his side, her hands shaking as she grabbed his face. "Oh my God, you're alive," she choked, tears streaking her cheeks. The taller cop, a grizzled guy with a mustache, hauled him up, gentle but firm, while his partner cuffed Buzz Cut against the wall. "What happened here?" he barked, eyeing the pipe, the blood. Jamal coughed, ribs screaming, voice hoarse. "Ambush, Greg Holt. He lured me." The cop nodded, jotting it down, radio crackling as they called for backup. An ambulance whining closer. Lena held his arm, steadying. him as paramedics swarmed, wrapping his ribs, stitching his temple. The warehouse a blur of red and blue lights. They loaded him into the rig, Lena climbing in, her hand gripping his tight. "You're okay. You're okay," she whispered, more to herself than him. He nodded, dazed, pain throbbing with every breath, Greg's escape gnawing at him. He'd survived, barely, thought he'd won with Vickers, but this was a war he hadn't seen coming. A beatdown meant to kill. The ambulance doors shut, the siren fading as they rolled toward the hospital, and his phone buzzed in Lena's pocket. A text from an unknown number popping up. "You'll wish you'd stayed down." Carter's voice echoed in his head, cold and quiet from that first night, and Jamal's blood ran cold. Greg wasn't alone, wasn't the endgame. He'd thought he was safe, thought the cops and Lena had pulled him out clean. But that text, those words, they were a promise darker and deeper than Greg's fists. They'd almost broken him, left him bleeding on that warehouse floor, and now something worse was circling, waiting to strike. Jamal Carter lay in the hospital bed, the sterile stink of antiseptic stinging his nose, his ribs throbbing under tight bandages, every breath a sharp reminder of the warehouse beating. The room hummed with the beep of monitors, fluorescent lights, buzzing overhead, casting harsh shadows on the tiled floor. His left eye was swollen half shut, a cut on his temple stitched tight, and his knuckles were raw from that one good swing at Greg's nose. Lena sat beside him, her scrubs swapped for a hoodie, her hands fidgeting with the hem, her face etched with worry. "You scared the hell out of me, Jamal," she said, voice low, shaky. "That text, 'wish you'd stayed down,' what's that mean?" He shifted, wincing as pain lanced through his side. Carter's cold stare flashing in his mind from that first night at the grill. "Means Greg's not alone," he rasped, throat dry. "Someone's pulling strings." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Fierce, then we find out who." The door creaked open, Marcus slipping in, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder, his dreads loose and wild. "Yo, bro, you look like you fought a truck," he said, setting up on the tray table. His tone light, but his eyes dark with anger. "Cops nabbed one of those goons, but Greg's in the wind." "How you holding?" Jamal grunted, pushing himself up despite the ache. "Been better." "What's on that text?" Marcus pulled out his phone, Carter's message glowing. "You'll wish you'd stayed down." "Burner number," he said, "but I'll trace it. Give me time." Jamal nodded, slow and grim, the pieces clicking too fast to ignore. Greg was a loose cannon, sure, but this felt bigger, colder, like a chess move he hadn't seen coming. "Dig into Carter," he said, voice hard. "Quiet one from the grill. Something's off with him." Marcus cracked his knuckles, grinning sharp. "On it." Lena stayed through the night, dozing in the chair, while Jamal stared at the ceiling, replaying the ambush, Greg's slurs, the pipe cracking his ribs. He'd survived. Thought Vickers's fall was the win, but this was deeper, a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. By morning, the doc cleared him, bruised but unbroken, and he limped out with Lena, her Honda waiting in the lot, windshield still cracked from the porch attack. Back home, the go-back paint glared under the gray sky, a taunt he couldn't scrub away yet. Marcus set up in the living room, laptop humming, coffee brewing as Jamal sank onto the couch, his body screaming, but his mind razor-sharp. "Carter's a ghost," Marcus muttered, scrolling fast. "No socials, no record. Nothing like Greg's loudmouth ass. But I got a hit, private investigator license, tied to a firm in Atlanta. Name's Carter Grayson, works for big shots who don't like spotlight." Jamal's gut twisted, cold and tight. "Pie, what's he doing with tourists?" Marcus kept digging, his screen a blur of files. "Check this, invoice from last month. Client's a Savannah elite. Old money type. Hired him to handle a situation. Dates match when you started pushing back." Jamal leaned forward, ignoring the stab in his ribs. "Handle me," Marcus nodded, grim. "Looks like it." Vickers wasn't the only one watching. Lena cursed, pacing again, her sneakers scuffing the floor. "So Greg's the muscle, Tanya's the connect, and Carter's the brain. This is a damn hit squad." Jamal's jaw clenched, the revelation sinking in, heavy and dark. Carter wasn't some tag-along. He was a pro, paid to crush him, and that first night the quiet stares, the calculated jabs, it was reconnaissance, not play. He'd thought he'd won with Vickers, thought Greg's rage was the threat, but Carter had been lurking, a shadow with a paycheck. Prove it, he told Marcus, voice steel. Link him to the grill, the frame up. Marcus typed faster, hacking into the Pi firm server. A backdoor he'd cracked years ago for kicks. Here, email to Tillman, same day you got canned. Pressure point applied, target neutralized. Sign CG. Jamal's blood boiled, the trap snapping into focus. He leaned on Tillman. Set me up for the bottle. Marcus kept going. A predator on the scent. More, meeting notes with a client post-leak. Says escalate containment. Protests disrupting assets. They're scared of you, man. Jamal stood, slow and pained, the spark roaring back. Then let's scare him more. He grabbed his phone, dialing the grill's owner, Mr. Hargrove, a reclusive old man who rarely showed his face. It rang twice before the gruff voice picked up. Carter, what's this about? Jamal cut straight in, no fluff. Your manager framed me for theft, fired me on a lie. Carter Grayson, Pi, made him do it. I've got proof. Silence stretched. Then Hargrove coughed, rough and dry. Grayson, that snake, came to me after the blog hit. Said you were stirring trouble, bad for business. I told Tillman to handle it, didn't know he'd go that far. Jamal's grip tightened, fury simmering. He went far enough to cuff me in front of your customers. You gonna fix this? Hargrove sighed, long and tired. I'll look into it. Stay out of trouble, kid. The line clicked dead, but Jamal wasn't waiting. He turned to Marcus. Live stream it now. Vickers' protests, Carter's game, all of it. Marcus grinned, wild and fierce. Setting up a feed through Ellie's blog network. The same crowd, still buzzing from the councilman's fall. Jamal faced the camera, battered but unbowed. His voice steady despite the pain. They tried to bury me, framed me, beat me, but I'm still here. Carter Grayson's a hired gun. Paid to shut me down, scared of what I started. Vickers was just the beginning. Share this. Savannah, let em know we don't break. The stream blew up, views spiking, comments flooding, the protests outside City Hall swelling louder. Chance of justice for Jamal shaking the streets. He shut it off, chest heaving. The community's roar a lifeline, pulling him up. He'd flipped. The script again, exposed Carter, rallied the town, thought he'd turned the tide for good this time. Lena clapped his shoulder, her grin fierce. You're unstoppable, bro, Marcus whooped, slamming his laptop shut. They're screwed now. Jamal exhaled, the wind sinking in. Sweet and hard-earned, his bruises a badge of it. He'd taken. Vickers, now Carter, thought he'd cracked the beast wide open. But as he sank back onto the couch, sirens wailed outside, sharp and sudden, red and blue lights flashing through the broken window. 2 cops banged on the door, loud and urgent. Lena jumping up to answer. Jamal, Carter here. The taller one barked, a beefy guy with a buzz cut. Jamal stood, slow, dread pooling cold in his gut. Yeah, what now? The cop stepped in, cuffs out. Voice flat. Lena Carter, you're under arrest. Drugs found in your car. Possession with intent. Lena's jaw dropped, her hands trembling. What? That's insane. I don't. The cop cut her off, spinning her round. Cuffs clicking tight as she yelped. Jamal lunged forward, ribs screaming, fury exploding. This is bullshit. You planted that. The second cop, weary with a mustache, blocked him, hand on his gun. Back off, sir, or your necks. They dragged Lena out, her protests echoing. Jamal, fix this, as the squad car door slammed. Peeling off into the night, he stood, frozen, the room spinning, Marcus cursing behind him. Carter, Jamal growled, the name a blade in his throat. He'd streamed the truth, rallied the town, thought he'd won clean, but this was the counterpunch. Vicious and precise, hitting where it hurt most. Lena, his rock, his sister, cuffed and gone. A frame-up colder than his own. He'd exposed. Carter, sure, but the Pi wasn't running. He was striking, using her to break him. The wind soured fast, victory slipping through his fingers. The warehouse beating a warm-up for this gut shot. He'd thought he was safe, thought the protests shielded him. But Carter's reach was long, ruthless, And now Lena was paying the price. Jamal sank to his knees, the go-back paint mocking him through the glass. His fists clenched bloody. They'd almost killed him. Now they'd taken her. And he knew one thing for damn sure. This wasn't over. It was just getting meaner. Jamal Carter stood in his trashed living room, the echo of Lena's protests, "Jamal, fix this," ringing in his ears as the squad car's taillights faded into the Savannah night. The go-back paint glared through the broken window, the air thick with the stench of wet plaster and his own blood. Still crusted on his knuckles from the warehouse, Marcus paced behind him, his laptop glowing on the coffee table, his voice a low growl. Carter framed her, man, planted those drugs slick as hell. Jamal's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms, fury boiling over the shock. Lena, his sister, his anchor, cuffed and hauled off like some street dealer, all because he dared to fight back. He'd exposed Vickers, outed Carter, rallied the town, thought he'd turned the tide, but this was a gut punch meant to break him, and it damn near did. He spun on Marcus, eyes blazing. "Get her out. Now." Marcus nodded, sharp and quick, diving back into his keyboard, the clatter of keys cutting through the silence. "Bail's gonna be steep. Possession with intent's no joke. I'll pull some cash. Hit up Ellie's network for a fund, but we need leverage." Jamal's mind raced, replaying Carter's text, "Wish you'd stayed down." The PI's cold. Game snapping into focus. "Leverage," he muttered, pacing the creaky floor, glass crunching under his sneakers. "Carter's the key. We nail him. This falls apart." Marcus squinted at the screen, fingers flying. "Got his hotel. Fancy spot downtown. Booked under his pie firm. You thinking what I'm thinking?" Jamal's jaw tightened, a plan sparking through the haze. "Yeah, I'm going in." Marcus raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Bro, you're barely walking. Warehouse messed you up bad." Jamal shook his head, fierce. "Don't care. Lena's not rotting in there for me." He grabbed his phone, ribs screaming as he moved, and headed out. The night cool and damp against his bruised skin. The bus ride downtown was a blur, headlights streaking past, his reflection in the window a battered ghost. Swollen eye and stitched temple staring back. Carter's hotel loomed ahead, a sleek tower of glass and steel, valet cars gleaming under the awning. Jamal slipped in through a side door, hoodie up, blending with the late-night crowd, his limp masked by sheer will. The lobby sparkled, marble, floors and chandeliers, a world he'd never belonged in, but he wasn't here to serve. He spotted Carter in the bar, weary frame hunched over a whiskey, his linen shirt crisp despite the chaos he'd sown. Jamal's pulse hammered, every step a jolt of pain, but he slid into a booth nearby, phone out. Recording low and steady, Carter's voice cut through the hum, calm and clipped, talking to a guy in a suit, gray hair, expensive watch, frames. "Holding," Carter said, swirling his drink. "Sister's locked up. He'll crack soon." The suit nodded, voice muffled but smug. "Good. Keep the pressure. Assets are at risk." Jamal's grip tightened, the confession gold in his hands. Carter admitting the setup like it was just business. He hit stop, sent it to Marcus with a text. "Got him. Leak it." Marcus fired back on it. Streaming now, Jamal stood, slow and deliberate, and approached, his shadow falling over Carter's table. "Nice plan," he said, voice rough, loud enough to turn heads. Carter froze, glass halfway to his lips, dark eyes flicking up, recognition sparking cold. "Carter Grayson, pie, framing my sister to shut me up. Smile, your live." Carter's smirk faded, the suit bolting upright, but Jamal was already moving, limping out as the bar buzzed, phones pinging with the stream. By morning, it was everywhere. Hashtag Carter caught trending. Ellie's blog screaming pie exposed in sister's frame up. The video racking views, Savannah's protests roaring louder, Free Lena signs waving outside the jail. Carter vanished, hotel room empty, disgraced and running, the firm cutting ties fast. Jamal bailed Lena out by noon, her arms around him tight despite his wince, her voice thick. "You're crazy, you know that." He grinned, bruised but unbroken. Had to. They crashed at his place. Marcus whooping as the news hit. Grayson investigation launched. Jamal sank onto the couch, Lena beside him, the weight lifting, sweet and hard. He'd fought desperate, turned Carter's own words against him. Thought he'd buried the beast this time. They'd celebrated with takeout, grease-soaked fries, and soda, the TV blaring Vickers' resignation replay, a rare laugh breaking through the tension. "We're good now, right?" Lena asked, hopeful, her eyes bright. Jamal nodded, leaning back, the fight draining out of him. "Yeah, we're good." He'd outsmarted Carter, freed Lena, thought the nightmare was finally dust. But as dusk settled, smoke curled through the air, sharp and acrid, a glow flickering outside. Lena jumped up, peering through the broken window, her scream shattering. The calm, fire, Jamal bolted, ribs howling, and saw it, the dockside bistro engulfed. Flames licking the roof, the river reflecting hell. Sirens wailed, firefighters swarming, but the building groaned, windows popping from the heat. Jamal ran out, Lena behind him, the crowd thickening on the docks. Gasps and shouts rising over the crackle. A note fluttered from the wreckage, pinned under a brick, Greg's scrawl unmistakable. "Burn for crossing us." Jamal's stomach dropped. The victory souring fast, his new job torched to ash. Firefighters battled the blaze, water hissing against the flames, saving half the structure. But the damage was done, dockside shuddered, his gig gone again. He stood there, smoke stinging his eyes, Lena's hand on his arm, Marcus jogging up. Breathless, "Greg," Jamal spat, crumpling the note, fury reigniting. He'd beaten Carter, freed Lena, thought he'd won clean. But Greg was back, crazier than ever, turning his comeback to cinders. The crowd murmured arson, Holt, the dots connecting loud. But the cops were slow, evidence thin beyond. The note, Jamal's chest heaved, the heat searing his bruised skin. Greg's promise, "You're gonna bleed," twisting into this, a Molotov goodbye. He'd fought desperate, clawed his way up, thought he'd buried them for good. But this was a beast that wouldn't die, striking wild and ruthless. Lena's voice broke through, low and fierce. "He's not stopping, is he?" Jamal shook his head, eyes locked on the smoldering ruin, the fight roaring back. "No, but I'm not either. Hey, drop a comment with number 1 if you think Jamal's still got the fight to take Greg down. Or number 2 if you're worried Greg's too far gone to stop. Ever had a win snatched away like that? Hit that like button if you're raging at this injustice, and subscribe to see how Jamal flips this fire back on them. What's Greg's next move after torching Jamal's life? Can he sink any lower? Or is this just the spark of something worse? Jamal Carter stood on the dock, the smoldering skeleton of the dockside bistro glowing against the savannah night, the air thick with ash and the sour sting of defeat. Greg's note, "Burned for crossing us," crumpled in his fist, the paper damp with sweat, his ribs aching from the warehouse beating, his new job torched to nothing. Lena gripped his arm, her voice trembling but fierce. "He's a monster, Jamal. This is too far." Marcus paced behind them, his dreads swinging, his laptop bag slung tight, muttering curses at the flames. Firefighters battled the last flickers, hoses hissing, the crowd's murmurs a dull roar in Jamal's ears. He'd beaten Carter, freed Lena, thought he'd clawed his way back, but this was Greg spitting on every win, turning it to cinders. His chest burned, not from smoke but rage, pure and jagged, cutting through the exhaustion. "He's not getting away with this," he said, voice low, a growl that promised blood. Lena's eyes widened, worry flashing. "What are you gonna do? Cops can't pin him yet." Jamal turned, the fire's glow painting his bruised face, his jaw set like stone. "I'll pin him myself." Marcus stopped pacing, nodding sharp. "I'm in, bro. Let's cook him." They piled into Lena's Honda, the cracked windshield catching the streetlights as they peeled away, the river's dark shimmer fading behind them. Back home, the go-back paint mocked him through the broken window, but Jamal didn't flinch. Storming inside, his limp fading under adrenaline, Marcus set up his laptop, the screen cutting through the dark, while Lena brewed coffee, the pot gurgling like a lifeline. "Greg's a trust fund punk," Jamal said, pacing the creaky floor, glass crunching under his sneakers. "Lives loud, parties hard." "Where's he hiding?" Marcus typed fast, pulling up socials. His grin feral, Country club, gated spot upriver. Members only, big event tonight. Some charity golf thing. Bet he's there, flexing like nothing happened. Jamal's mind clicked, a plan snapping into place, sharp and reckless. I'm crashing it. Lena spun, coffee sloshing. You're crazy, he'll see you coming. Jamal shook his head, fierce. Not if I'm invisible. He dug through his closet, pulling an old waiter uniform from a gig 2 years back. Black vest and tie, faded but clean. Marcus smirked, catching on. Trojan horse, husneaky. Jamal nodded, slipping it on, the fabric tight over his bandages, pain flaring but ignored. Get me in, Marcus, staff list, anything. Marcus hacked the club's system, a backdoor from a vendor site, and slotted Jamal in as James Cole. Temp waiter, no questions asked. By dusk, he was on a bus, the uniform itching, his swollen eye hidden under a cap, the country club looming ahead. All white columns and manicured lawns, a fortress of privilege. He slipped through the service entrance, blending with the bustle of staff, trays clinking, the air rich with cigar smoke and perfume. The ballroom sprawled wide, chandeliers glittering, suits and gowns mingling over champagne flutes, laughter bouncing off polished walls. Jamal scanned the crowd, tray steady, spotting Greg near the stage, his sunburned face flushed with bourbon, his polo shirt wrinkled, charming a knot of old money with that loudmouth grin. He hadn't seen the fire's fallout, didn't know Jamal was here, a ghost in plain sight. The plan was simple, hit him where it hurt most, his ego, live and loud. Jamal moved smooth, serving drinks, his limp masked by purpose, the tray a shield as he edged toward the bar. Marcus had slipped him a vial earlier, a laxative from Lena's med stash, hospital grade. She'd called it, grinning dark. Jamal waited, timing it perfect, Greg swaggering up for a refill. His glass empty, his laugh booming. Gimme. Something stiff, he slurred, not glancing at Jamal, just another faceless server. Jamal poured, quick and quiet, spiking the bourbon with a flick of his wrist, the clear liquid vanishing into the amber. Here you go, he said, voice low, stepping back as Greg snatched it, downing half in one gulp. Minutes ticked by, Jamal circling the room, serving, watching. The clock above the stage, creeping toward the big speech. Greg climbed up, mic in hand, his voice blaring through the speakers. Honored to be here, folks. Hope family's always giving back. The crowd clapped, polite and smug. But Jamal saw it. The sweat beading on Greg's forehead, his grin twitching, stomach gurgling, loud enough to catch on the mic. He faltered, mid-sentence, and we're proud to, oh damn, clutching his gut, face paling fast. Laughter rippled, soft at first, then roaring as he doubled over, a wet groan escaping. The mic amplifying every sound. He bolted, tripping, off the stage, crashing into a table, champagne flutes shattering, the room erupting as he ran, bow-legged and desperate, toward the bathroom, leaving a trail of gasps and giggles. Jamal slipped into the shadows, tray abandoned, his smirk hidden. Under the cap, the humiliation sinking in sweet and sharp. Greg's pride, his big night, turned to a literal shitshow, the crowd buzzing, phones out, videos spreading fast. He'd hit him good, thought he'd won this round clean. The breaking point flipped back on them. He was out the service door, limping toward the bus stop, the night cool against his bruised skin. When headlights flared behind him, too close, too fast, a black sedan screeched up, cutting him off, the driver's window rolling down. A gaunt face peering out, eyes cold under a low brim hat. Jamal Carter, the man asked, voice flat, a gun glinting in his lap. Jamal froze, heart slamming, the cap slipping as he backed up. Who's asking? The man didn't blink, cocking the pistol, someone who don't like loose ends. Tires squealed as he floored it, the sedan lunging, Jamal diving into the ditch, the bumper grazing his leg, pain exploding fresh. He rolled, mud soaking his uniform, the car circling back, engine roaring, but a truck rumbled past, headlights blinding, forcing the sedan to swerve off, vanishing into the dark. Jamal scrambled up, panting, mud caked on his hands, the gun's glint burned into his skull. Lena's car screeched up minutes later, her face pale as she leapt out. What the hell happened? He climbed in, voice ragged. "Hitman, Tanya's dad, Vickers, he's not done." Lena cursed, peeling out, her knuckles white on the wheel. "You humiliated Greg, now this?" Jamal nodded, the laxative wind souring fast, Greg's collapse a footnote to this. A hired killer on his tail. He'd pushed too far, thought he'd broken them at their own game, but Vickers wasn't playing anymore. He was paying to end it. The sedan's roar echoed in his head, the gun's cold promise a step past Greg's fire, past Carter's frames, into something deadly. He'd dodged it barely, thought the club was the knockout, but this was the breaking point. Real and raw, a line crossed he couldn't unsee. Lena glanced at him, eyes wide. "They're trying to kill you now." Jamal stared out, mud dripping. Onto the seat, his voice steeled despite the shake. "Yeah, but I'm still here." He'd hit Greg hard, turned his spotlight to shame, thought he'd won big. But Vickers's reach was longer, meaner, a shadow that wouldn't quit. The fight had gone lethal, the stakes climbing from pride to survival, and Jamal knew one thing. For damn sure, they'd underestimated him again, thought a bullet could stop him. But he wasn't breaking, not yet. Jamal Carter slumped in Lena's Honda, mud caking his stolen waiter uniform. The hitman sedan still roaring in his ears, the gun's glint flashing like a warning he couldn't shake. The night pressed in, Savannah's streets slick with mist, the air heavy with the promise of more blood. Lena's hands shook on the wheel, her voice tight. "A hitman, Jamal. This is insane. We need to run." He shook his head, slow and fierce, pain pulsing through his bruised leg where the car had grazed him. "Running's what they want." "I'm ending this," she cursed, sharp and low, but didn't argue. Peeling toward home, the cracked windshield catching the streetlights in jagged streaks. The go-back paint greeted them, a sneer on his porch, but Jamal stormed inside. Mud tracking across the floor, his mind a furnace of rage and focus. Marcus waited, laptop open. His dreads wild, his face grim. Heard sirens. What now? Jamal yanked off the cap, tossing it aside, his voice steel. "Vickers sent a killer. Almost ran me down. Greg's a sideshow. This is war." Marcus whistled low, fingers hovering over the keys. "Plan." Jamal's eyes narrowed. A spark igniting. "Lure the hitman. Flip it on him. Then hit Vickers where he sleeps. Hard." Lena grabbed his arm, desperate. "You're hurt, Jamal. You can't." He pulled free, fierce. "I can. For you, for me, for all of it." Marcus nodded, diving into his screen, tracing the hitman's sedan through traffic cams. A partial plate snagged from a blurry frame. "Got a rental, tied to a shell company. Vickers' fingerprints all over it. He's sloppy when he's mad." Jamal paced, glass crunching under his sneakers, the plan sharpening. "Docks, midnight, empty, open, my turf." Marcus hacked. A burner text, spoofing Jamal's number. "Meet me, Docks, finish it." Sent to the hitman's last ping. A baited hook. Jamal grabbed a duffel, stuffing it with a flare gun from Marcus's truck. A decoy to draw the bastard out. Lena watched, pale but steady, handing him a pocket knife, her voice low. "Don't die, you hear me?" He nodded, the weight settling in, and headed out, the night swallowing him whole. The dock stretched dark and silent, the river lapping against pilings, the air thick with salt and diesel. Jamal limped to a rusted crane, setting the flare gun on a crate, his breath shallow, ribs screaming with every step. He crouched, waiting, the decoy boat a beat-up skiff Marcus had scrounged bobbing 20 yards out. Rigged with a timer to spark at 12 sharp, the flare would light it up, pull the hitman in, give Jamal the drop. Minutes ticked by, the mist curling low, his pulse hammering, when headlights cut through, slow and predatory. The sedan rolled up, engine purring, the gaunt driver stepping out, hat low, gun gleaming in his grip. He scanned the dark, voice flat. "Carter, show yourself." The flare popped, a hiss then a scream of red light, the skiff bursting into a fireball, flames licking the water. The hitman spun, startled, sprinting toward it, gun raised. And Jamal moved, silent and swift, slamming the knife's hilt into the man's neck from behind. He crumpled, gun clattering, Jamal kicking it into the river with a splash, pinning him face down in the gravel, knee on his spine. "Who sent you?" he snarled, twisting the man's arm. The hitman coughed, voice raspy. "Vickers, you idiot. You're dead anyway." Jamal zip-tied his wrists with strips from Marcus, dragging him to the crane, securing him tight. Sirens wailed, faint but closing. Lena's 911 call hitting perfect. Cops swarming as Jamal stepped back, mud and blood streaking his face. The taller cop, buzz cut glinting, hauled the hitman up. Radio crackling, caught him red-handed. Assault and arson ties. Vickers is next. Jamal nodded. Chest heaving, the trap sprung clean, the killer down. But he wasn't done. Vickers' private gala loomed, a swank affair at his riverfront mansion. Elites sipping champagne while Jamal bled. Marcus had the address, hacked invites, and Jamal was crashing it, battered but unbowed. Lena drove, her Honda rattling. Marcus, in the back with his laptop, projecting bank records. Vickers' dirty millions ready to blast. The mansion glowed, all glass and marble, valets buzzing, the night alive with privilege. Jamal limped in through a service gate, uniform swap for a stolen tux. His swollen eye a war badge, Marcus sensing the hack to a projector inside. The ballroom thrummed. Vickers at the podium, his silver hair slick, voice smooth. "Friends, we rebuild stronger, cleaner." Jamal hit the switch, Marcus's feed hijacking the screen. Bank logs flashing, offshore accounts in bold, the crowd gasping as Vickers froze, his smile cracking. "That's your councilman," Jamal yelled, voice rough, stepping into the light, tux muddy, face bruised. "Bribes, hitman, arson. He tried to kill me." Murmurs erupted, phones out. Vickers stammering, lies, all lies, but the records glowed, undeniable, his empire crumbling live. Cuffs bursting, tipped by Marcus, cuffs out. The buzz-cut cop grabbing Vickers, his protests drowned by booze. Jamal stood tall, the room spinning, thought he'd won it all, flipped the beast on its head. When a figure shoved through the crowd, Greg, his sunburned face wild, bourbon on his breath, a pistol trembling in his hand. "You ruined us," he screamed, eyes bloodshot, the gun jerking up. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening. Glass shattering somewhere, chaos exploding as guests shrieked, diving under tables. Jamal ducked, heart slamming, Lena yanking him down, Marcus shouting, "Get out!" Greg waved the gun, staggering, his voice a ragged howl. "You took everything. You bastard!" Cops lunged, tackling him mid-step, the pistol skidding across the marble, but the damage was done. The gala a war zone, Jamal's wind teetering on a razor's edge. Lena dragged him toward the exit, her breath hitching. "He's lost it, Jamal. Completely lost it." He nodded, mud streaking his tux, the shots echo pounding in his skull. Vickers cuffed, Greg pinned. But that gun, that scream, it was a wild card he hadn't seen coming. He'd lured the hitman, outsmarted Vickers, thought he'd buried them for good this time, exposed their rot to the world. So why was Greg still clawing back, armed and unhinged? Turning victory into chaos, they stumbled outside. Cop lights flashing, the mansion a circus of shouts and sirens. Marcus behind them, laptop clutched tight. "You okay?" he panted, eyes wide. Jamal nodded, slow, blood dripping from a fresh graze on his arm. The bullet's near miss burning hot. "Yeah, but it's not over." Vickers was down, the hitman caught. The gala a ruin. But Greg's rage, that shot, it was a beast unleashed, a final swing from a cornered animal. He'd pushed them to the breaking point, sure, thought he'd won the war. But this was a battle he hadn't planned, a showdown that flipped the script raw and loud. Lena's grip tightened, her voice low. "He wanted you dead right there." Jamal stared back at the mansion, Greg's screams fading as cops hauled him off, the crowd buzzing, phones still rolling. "He missed," he said, voice steel despite the shake, but his eyes stayed hard, locked on the chaos. He'd taken the fight to them, cracked their world open, thought he'd sealed it tight. But Greg's gun, Vickers' reach, it was a storm that wouldn't quit. The hitman was a hired blade, Vickers a fallen king. But Greg was personal. A loose cannon with nothing left to lose, and that shot was a promise, not an end. Jamal's chest heaved, the night pressing in, mud and blood his armor now, and he knew one thing for damn sure. They'd tried to bury him again, thought a bullet could finish it. But he was still standing, still fighting, and this showdown wasn't the last word. Jamal Carter stumbled out of Vickers's shattered gala, mud streaking his stolen tux, blood seeping from the graze on his arm where Greg's wild shot had kissed him. The night alive with sirens and chaos, Lena clung to his side, her hoodie soaked with sweat, her breath ragged as she dragged him toward her Honda, parked crooked by the mansion's service gate. Marcus trailed, clutching his laptop like a lifeline, his dreads swinging, his voice sharp. "That was too close, man." Greg's lost his damn mind. The ballroom behind them buzzed. Cops swarming, guests shrieking, the chandelier's glass still tinkling to the marble floor. Jamal's chest heaved, pain pulsing through his bruised ribs. But his eyes stayed hard, locked on the scene as Greg's screams, "You took everything," faded under the weight of tackling officers. He'd lured the hitman, exposed Vickers, thought he'd won it all. But that gun, that shot, it was a jagged edge he hadn't seen coming. Lena shoved him into the passenger seat, her hands trembling. "We're out, now. Before they pin something else on us." He nodded, slow and grim, the adrenaline crashing, leaving him raw. The Honda peeled off, tires screeching, the mansion shrinking in the rearview, red and blue lights painting the riverfront in strobes. Back home, the go-back paint glared under the porch light, a scar he'd wear until this was dust. But Jamal didn't pause, limping inside, the galas, chaos looping in his head. Greg's gun, Vickers's cuffs, the hitman's snarl. It was a storm he'd walked through. Thought he'd ended, but that shot still echoed, a near miss that could have been his grave. Marcus sat up on the couch, laptop glowing, pulling feeds. From the night, his voice tense. "Cops got Greg pinned, Vickers too. Hitman's singing already. You did it, bro. Broke 'em all." Lena sank beside him, her face pale but fierce. "Yeah, but at what cost? You're a mess, Jamal. And they're still kicking." He stood, mud flaking off his tux, his swollen eye throbbing, and stared out the broken window, the river dark, ribbon under the moon. "They kicked last," he said, voice low, steel creeping in. "Time to bury 'em for good." Marcus frowned, squinting at him. "What's left? They're done, right?" Jamal turned, slow, a smirk tugging at his busted lip, something deeper flickering in his gaze. "Not yet." The door creaked open and a shadow stepped in, tall and broad, the man from the Rolls-Royce. His tailored suit crisp, his gray hair catching the light, his voice smooth as gravel. "Good work, son," he said, shutting the door soft, the lock clicking like a full stop. Lena jumped, hand on her knife, Marcus's jaw dropping. But Jamal didn't flinch, nodding once, sharp and sure. "Took you long enough, Pops." The room froze, the air thick with shock, Lena's breath hitching. "Pops, what the hell?" "Jamal." Marcus blinked, laptop slipping. "Son, who's this guy?" The man chuckled, low and warm, stepping into the glow, his presence filling the space, a quiet power radiating. "Malcolm Carter," he said, voice steady. "Jamal's father. Been watching this mess unfold, figured it was time to step in." Lena's knife clattered to the floor, her eyes wide. "Father, you said he was gone." "Jamal, dead or something." Jamal shook his head, slow, the smirk growing, his bruised face a map of the fight he'd won. "Never said dead. Just out of sight. Pops don't like this spotlight, but he's been here always." Malcolm crossed his arms, his Rolex glinting, a match to Greg's but heavier, earned. "Built half this waterfront, kid," he said, nodding at Jamal. "Started slinging drinks 30 years back, turned it into an empire, silent steaks in the grill. Dockside, half the docks, let Jamal run his own show, test the world's colors." Marcus whistled, low and stunned. "Empire, you're a damn kingpin." Malcolm's grin was sharp, a blade honed quiet. "Something like that. Wanted Jamal to see who people really are. No silver spoon, just grit." He passed, loud and messy. Jamal stepped forward, mud flaking off, his voice steady despite the pain. "That rolls at the grill. Pop's picking me up. Their first clue they screwed with the wrong guy. I played waiter to watch Greg, Tanya, Vickers, Carter, all of them, showing their hands." Lena sank back, shaking her head, a laugh breaking through. "You're insane, both of you. All this a test." Malcolm nodded. Eyes on Jamal, pride glinting. Test he aced, took down. A councilman, a pie, a trust fund clown, dodged a bullet, kept his soul. Now we clean up. Jamal's smirk faded, his gaze hardening as he turned to the window, the river calm beyond the chaos. Greg's in cuffs, Vickers too, hitman's talking. What's the play? Malcolm pulled a phone. Dialing quick, his voice dropping low. Cops owe me favors, waterfront's mine to pull. They rot, all three, no bail, no deals. Evidence stacked by dawn. Marcus grinned, fierce and wild. Kingpin moves, huh? What about the bistro? Malcolm's eyes glinted, sharp, rebuilt, better, my dime. Jamal runs it. No aprons unless he wants em. Jamal exhaled, slow and jagged, the weight lifting. The fight scars a crown now. He'd thought he'd won with the hitman, the gala, Greg's tackle, but this was the real flip, a legacy he'd bled for. Hidden in plain sight. He glanced at Lena, her shock softening to a grin, Marcus still gaping. The room humming with a truth bigger than the war. You knew all along, Lena asked, voice soft. Jamal nodded, slow, knew enough. Pops taught me, watch, wait, strike. When they're blind. Malcolm clapped his shoulder, firm and warm. They're blind now, son. Greg's cell's waiting, Vickers's too. Carter's scam burned out. You stood tall, showed em all. Jamal limped to the porch, the night cool against his battered skin. The river's murmur a steady pulse, Malcolm beside him, Lena and Marcus inside, voices low with awe. He'd flipped tables at the grill, torched Greg's pride, cracked Vickers's. Empire, dodged death, thought he'd fought alone. But this was deeper, a game he'd been born to win. Greg's shot had missed, inches from his skull. Cops pinning him as he thrashed. Vickers cuffed mid-speech, the hitman spilling to save his neck. They'd misjudged him every step. Thought a waiter was their punching bag, but he was Malcolm's blood. A kingpin's son playing low to rise high. Still think I don't belong? He'd asked Greg at the grill, that first night. And now the answer screamed, loud and final. He belonged more than they'd ever know. Malcolm's voice cut through, soft but iron. They rot, you rebuild. That's the lesson. Jamal nodded, the mud drying, blood crusting. His empire unshaken beneath the bruises. Greg sat in a cell, Tanya's world collapsed with her dad, Carter's career ash. All because they'd underestimated a waiter with a receipt and a fire that wouldn't quit. He'd thought the gala was the end, Vickers's fall the win, Greg's. Shot the last gasp, but this twist, this truth, it was the real punch, a legacy dropped like a bomb. The night stretched out, Savannah quiet beyond the sirens, the river flowing steady. And Jamal stood taller, battered but unbroken. The fight, won not just with fists, but with roots they'd never seen. Malcolm stepped back, fading into the house, leaving Jamal alone on the porch. The go back paint a joke now, a taunt he'd turned to dust. He'd clawed through their hate, their traps, their bullets, thought he'd survived by grit alone. But it was bigger, a throne he'd claimed without them knowing. Greg's cell clanged shut somewhere. Vickers's pleas echoing in a jailhouse, and Jamal's smirk returned, quiet and sure, the war over. The lesson there's to choke on. Jamal Carter's journey in this story is a raw testament to resilience, cunning, and the unyielding power of self-worth against systemic hate. The first lesson screams loud, never underestimate someone based on their surface. Greg, Tanya, and Vickers saw Jamal as a mere waiter, a target for their bigotry. But he turned their assumptions into their downfall, revealing a legacy they couldn't fathom. It's a gut check judged too quick, and you might be staring down a kingpin's son. Second, the story hammers home that fighting back isn't just about fists or fire, it's about strategy. Jamal didn't just swing, he outsmarted using leaks, hacks, and grit to flip the script, showing that brains can break empires when brawn's not enough. Third, community matters. Lena and Marcus weren't just Sedekics, they were his lifeline, proving that no one wins alone against a stacked deck. Fourth, the ugliness of racism isn't a one-off slur. It's a machine from receipts to hitmen, and dismantling it takes relentless guts. Finally, heritage can be a hidden ace. Jamal's father, Malcolm, wasn't just a shadow, but a silent force, teaching us roots can fuel a fight in ways no one sees coming. This isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a blueprint for standing tall when the world wants you small. So, what's your take? Ever faced a Greg who thought they owned you, only to flip it back on them? Drop a comment below, hit that like button if Jamal's grit fired you up, and subscribe for more stories of justice kicking hate to the curb. Share this if you believe respect beats wealth every time. Thanks for riding this wild wave with us. Here's to thriving against the odds, always.